Why do so many people dream about the end? When we hear stories of trumpets, of sky splitting, of loved ones vanishing, our first impulse is fear, fear that something is coming, that the clock is running out. But as Carl Jung once said, the dream is the theater where the dreamer is at once the scene, the actor, the prompter, and the critic. The apocalypse in your sleep then is not a cosmic forecast. It is a psychic stage where the deepest parts of your being enact the tension between who you are and who you could become. We live in an age where the collective imagination is haunted by endings. We scroll through news of collapse, of melting ice and moral fracture, and we fall asleep with the same anxiety that fills our waking hours. So it is no surprise that our dreams have begun to echo the same themes. Jung believed that the unconscious is always compensatory. It balances what our conscious mind refuses to see. Where love stops, power begins, he wrote. Meaning that the more we tighten our grip on control, the more our dreams loosen it through symbols of loss, death, and renewal. The so-called rapture dream, then, is not the end of the world. It is the soul's demand for rebalancing, its attempt to restore what consciousness has neglected. Think of it like this. When a person or a culture becomes too identified with progress, comfort, or certainty, the unconscious speaks in images of destruction, not to punish, but to heal. Jung called this the enantiodromia, the turning of things into their opposite when they reach their extreme. In dreams, fire purifies what can no longer live. Floods dissolve rigid boundaries. The trumpet sounds not to terrify but to awaken. The psyche, Jung said, creates beyond itself when the conscious mind cannot. And so the multitudes who dream of the world's end are not collectively predicting an event, they are collectively revealing an inner threshold. Something in the modern soul is exhausted. Something is longing to die, not the body, but the false self that has mistaken noise for meaning. The unconscious answers this crisis through imagery, powerful enough to break our waking hypnosis. This is why rapture dreams feel both terrifying and holy. They are encounters with what Jung called the numinous, that quality of energy that makes the ego tremble because it senses the presence of something vast and autonomous. He wrote, "The encounter with the numinous is the true therapy. It is what heals the wound of the soul. In that trembling, the personality begins to expand. What feels like judgment is often invitation. What feels like disappearance is transformation." So tonight, as we explore these dreams, we'll treat them not as omens of doom, but as mirrors of awakening. Each image, the sky opening, people vanishing, fire descending, can be read as a stage in the psyche's own rapture, the inner ascent toward wholeness. Jung would remind us that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The world that ends in your dream is the one built by avoidance. The one that begins afterward is the world built by integration. In the next section, we'll ground ourselves more deeply in Jung's understanding of dreams themselves, what they are, why they speak in symbols, and how they guide the psyche toward balance. Before we can understand why so many people dream about the end, we have to understand what a dream actually is. Not what the world says. It is not random noise from the sleeping brain, not divine dictation, but what Jung discovered through decades of listening to thousands of dreamers and to his own unconscious. Carl Jung wrote, "The dream is a spontaneous self-portrayal in symbolic form of the actual situation in the unconscious. That means the dream does not care about our conscious theories or our daily logic. It speaks for what is hidden, neglected, or repressed. When we sleep, the barrier between consciousness and the unconscious thins, and the deeper layers of the psyche begin to speak in their own language, the language of image, emotion, and metaphor. In waking life, our awareness is narrow. We identify with one fragment of the psyche, the ego, and we believe its viewpoint is the whole truth. But Jung realized that the ego is like a small island surrounded by an ocean of unconscious life. Dreams rise from that ocean. They are the tides of meaning that reach the shore of awareness, trying to restore balance between what we think we are and what we actually are. Jung said that dreams are the facts from which we must proceed because they show us the state of the inner world as it truly is, not as we wish it to be. They are not moralistic, not sentimental. They are objective pictures of psychic reality. When the conscious attitude becomes too one-sided, too rational, too proud, too certain, the dream introduces its opposite. If you live entirely in the light, the dream brings shadow. If you live in control, the dream brings chaos. This is not punishment. It is compensation. The unconscious seeks wholeness, not comfort. The rational mind often wants to dismiss this. It says, these are just neurons firing random patterns. But the psyche, Jung would argue, has purpose. It has intention. He wrote, the unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. Not only dark, but also light. Not only bestial, semi-human, and demonic, but superhuman, spiritual, and divine. Dreams, therefore, are not static reflections. They are living communications between these poles. They are the conversation between your mortal limitations and your immortal potential. And importantly, the dream does not speak in facts, it speaks in feelings. When you wake from a dream, what lingers most strongly is not the literal sequence, but the emotional temperature, awe, fear, wonder, loss, revelation. That emotional imprint is the true message. Jung advised his patients to ask not what does this dream mean, but what emotion did it leave behind. For it is that feeling, when integrated consciously, that begins to change one's life. This is why apocalyptic or rapture dreams cannot be understood through prediction. They are not calendars, they are mirrors. The psyche does not care about forecasting events in the outer world. It cares about restoring order in the inner world. If the dream shows destruction, it is because something in us has become too rigid, too inflated, too far from the living center. The dream destroys only to renew. Jung once compared the psyche to nature, self-regulating, endlessly adaptive, always moving toward equilibrium. Just as the body produces fever to burn infection, the psyche produces dream imagery to burn through illusion. And so, when thousands of people around the world begin to dream of fire, collapse, and ascension, we are witnessing not madness, but a collective attempt at psychic healing. The unconscious, Jung said, is both personal and collective. Each dream is yours alone, but its symbols draw from the same ancient well of human experience. This is why your private dream of the end of the world can feel universal, as if it belongs to everyone. It does. It arises from what Jung called the collective unconscious, the inherited layer of the psyche where archetypal patterns dwell, the mother, the hero, the shadow, the apocalypse. When one of these great patterns becomes active, we all dream it differently, but the melody is the same. So when we dream of the world ending, the psyche is not predicting destruction. It is trying to correct something in consciousness that has gone too far in one direction. The dream is the psyche's immune response to imbalance. And that brings us to our next question. If the unconscious sends the same image to thousands of people at once, what is it saying about the state of the world itself? When one person dreams of the world ending, we call it anxiety. When millions do, the psyche itself is speaking. Jung taught that there are layers to the unconscious, personal at the surface and collective at its depths. The personal layer holds the private debris of a life, forgotten memories, unmet desires, repressed pain, but deeper still lies a shared inheritance, the collective unconscious. which Jung described as the psychic system of a universal, collective, and impersonal nature which is identical in all individuals. It is the inner continent all human beings share, older than language, older than culture, older even than fear. When great changes tremble through civilization, this layer begins to stir. The collective unconscious, like a sea in storm, throws up archetypal images that express the tension of the age. These are not random, they are the timeless ways the psyche mirrors transformation. In ancient times, people dreamed of floods and gods descending from the sky. Today, we dream of nuclear fire, collapsing cities, or bodies dissolving into light. The symbols evolve, but the archetype remains the same, the end of an era and the birth of another. Jung observed this in the years before both world wars. He wrote, "As a physician of the soul, I became convinced that psychic epidemics are infinitely more devastating than the worst of catastrophes." He meant that when the collective unconscious is stirred, images of destruction surge across the minds of millions, not because fate has decreed catastrophe, but because the human spirit is demanding renewal. These images are pressure valves for civilization's hidden imbalance. Look around our own time, technology accelerating beyond comprehension, nature pushed to the edge, individuals torn between identity and emptiness. The conscious world has become too inflated, too sure of its dominance, too forgetful of its roots. The collective psyche compensates with dreams of collapse, not to doom us, but to remind us that no structure, inner or outer, can survive without soul. Jung once remarked, "We do not solve our problems, we outgrow them." The apocalypse in dreams, then, is a sign that humanity is trying to outgrow its present form. The dream world does not destroy for destruction's sake, it dismantles what no longer serves the evolution of consciousness. The old myths of judgment and rapture speak to this archetypal process. They are psychological languages for what happens when the ego must yield to something greater, the self, the organizing principle of the whole psyche. In a rapture dream, where the sky opens or light descends, we are witnessing this archetype in motion, the dissolution of the ego so that a larger wholeness can emerge. Jung called this experience the transcendent function, the process by which opposites within the psyche reconcile, giving birth to a new attitude. And when this process activates, not just in individuals, but in societies, the symbols spread like wildfire across the collective dreamscape. That is why so many people report the same imagery: fire, sound, vanishing, loved ones, the heavens splitting apart. Each dreamer experiences it through personal emotion, yet all are participating in the same drama, the ego's confrontation with the self. The fear that the world is ending masks a deeper truth that the old worldview must end because consciousness itself is ready to renew. Jung wrote, "Where there is no renewal, there is no real life. The collective dream of the end is not prophecy. It is the psyche's immune system attempting to heal a species caught in imbalance. The human world, severed from its inner center, dreams of its own destruction because it longs unconsciously for rebirth." And so these rapture dreams are not just yours or mine, they belong to all of us. They are the language of a shared soul whispering through billions of sleeping minds. Change is coming not from above but from within. Now that we've seen how collective imagery mirrors the condition of humanity itself, we can descend again into the personal, into the individual symbols that carry this vast meaning into the intimate theater of your own psyche. When the sky opens in a dream, something deeper than vision is taking place. It is not simply a picture of clouds parting, it is a psychic event, a rupture in the boundaries of ordinary consciousness. Jung wrote, "The psyche has its own light, and it casts shadows of which our reason knows nothing. In this moment, the unconscious light breaks through the ceiling of the ego, and what we call heaven is nothing other than the symbol for the totality of the self, revealing itself to the limited human perspective. People often describe these dreams as luminous, a trumpet, a wind, the clouds splitting, a radiance that feels both terrifying and holy. This imagery belongs to what Jung called the numinous experience, a direct encounter with a force that exceeds comprehension. The ego cannot contain it, it can only bow before it. Jung said, the numinous experience is the authentic religious experience. It is the meeting with the power of the self. When the sky opens, it means the unconscious has reached such intensity that it must reveal its presence. Something transcendent seeks dialogue. The self symbol of wholeness, divinity, and the center of being presses against the fragile walls of the conscious mind, demanding recognition. In waking life, this might correspond to moments of existential turning points, a collapse of meaning, a spiritual awakening, a realization that no outer structure can hold what your inner life is trying to become. To the ego, such an opening feels like disaster. We call it anxiety, breakdown, loss of control. But Jung warned that the gods have become diseases, meaning when the archetypal forces of the soul are denied their rightful reverence, they return as neurosis, panic, or obsession. A dream of the sky splitting is the psyche's sacred protest. You have outgrown this small world. Open upward. This is why the symbol appears with such grandeur. The heavens part, light floods in, and the dreamer is struck by awe. The experience is too large to interpret. It must be endured. Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The opening of the sky is not an escape from darkness, it is the moment when darkness itself becomes transparent, revealing the light behind it. To meet the transcendent in a dream is to stand in that impossible balance between terror and grace. You sense a presence that knows you completely, and yet it does not judge, it simply calls. This is why so many describe a sound, a trumpet, or a voice. The archetype of the heavenly summons appears when the soul is ready to expand beyond its current form. Jung noted that transformation always begins with a symbol of elevation, flight, ascent, breaking the roof, or piercing the sky. He wrote, every advance of consciousness is a kind of Promethean crime against the gods, and every step forward means a leaving behind. The dream's message, then, is not that the world will end, but that your sky is cracking open, that something in you is ready to meet a reality beyond the one you've constructed. The psychological question becomes, where in my life is something higher trying to break through, but I'm afraid to face it? Maybe it's a truth you keep avoiding, a calling you postpone, a capacity for love you repress because it would rearrange your life. The opening sky says, it's time. This symbol initiates the series of transformations we call the inner rapture. The psyche begins its ascent toward wholeness, but not without cost. For to rise, something must fall away. Not every dream of light feels uplifting. Some follow immediately with absence, with loneliness, with the unbearable feeling of being left behind. And that brings us to the next sign. After the sky opens in a dream, something shifts. The light recedes, and often the dreamer finds himself alone. The familiar world, the friends, the crowd, the family has vanished. You call their names, but only silence answers. This image is so powerful that entire traditions have built doctrines around it. The terror of being left behind. Yet, in Jungian terms, this is not divine punishment, it is the symbol of individuation. Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming oneself means leaving behind the versions of you that only existed in relation to others. The obedient child, the role player, the mask that kept peace but stifled truth. Dreams of being left alone or watching others ascend are the psyche's portrayal of this necessary separation. The ego experiences it as abandonment. The self experiences it as liberation. In the process of individuation, the unconscious begins to pull energy back from the collective identities we've depended on: family expectations, religious dogma, social validation. When that withdrawal begins, it feels like the world disappears. We look around and find that what once gave meaning now feels hollow. Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." The dream of vanishing people externalizes that inner loneliness, the sense that no one can follow you where you're going because your path has become uniquely yours. This is why so many rapture dreams contain the ache of exclusion. The psyche stages the feeling of being left behind to dramatize the ego's resistance to change. It whispers, "If I become who I truly am, I'll lose everyone." Yet this very loss is the threshold to authenticity. The dream says you are not being left behind, you are being called apart. To the collective-minded person, individuation always looks like estrangement. But Jung warned that remaining in the collective too long leads to spiritual suffocation. The more you are identical with the collective, the more your individual life is threatened, he wrote. The unconscious therefore begins its merciful rebellion. It takes away the false crowd, the approving eyes, the need to belong in their place. It leaves a silence vast enough for the self to speak. If you dream of others disappearing, do not interpret it as divine rejection. Ask instead, who in me has I outgrown? Which internal figures, parents, authorities, beliefs must release me so that a new center can form? The people who vanish are often projections of the parts of you that can no longer accompany your transformation. They are the psychic companions of an old world. And yet, this loneliness is sacred. Jung described individuation as a pilgrimage through the land of the dead, because the ego must mourn its attachments before it can encounter the eternal. Every person who disappears in your dream represents a psychic death, and every death clears space for rebirth. Eventually, this silence begins to hum with a new sound. It's as though, from somewhere beyond visibility, something calls your name again. Not a human voice, but a resonance. The psyche, having drawn you away from imitation, now summons you toward awareness. The next stage is not emptiness, but awakening, a sound that demands your attention, as if the universe itself were trying to wake you. After the loneliness comes the call. You may be dreaming of a horn, a trumpet, a thunderous voice, or a vibration so immense it shakes the sky itself. It is sudden, commanding, unmistakable. You wake with your heart racing, as if something had reached through the veil of sleep and said, "Now." Jung knew this image well. He called it the summons of the self, the moment when the unconscious breaks its silence and demands participation. In mythic language, it sounds like the voice of God. In psychological language, it is the autonomous psyche insisting on awareness. Jung wrote, "When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate." The trumpet in your dream is the psyche's final attempt to prevent fate from erupting in the outer world by forcing you to face it within. We tend to ignore the whispering symptoms of our inner life. The fatigue we rationalize, the dissatisfaction we bury, the quiet knowing that the chapter has ended. But the psyche is patient only up to a point. When repression becomes too deep, the unconscious grows loud. It stages events, dreams, and synchronicities with increasing intensity until you listen. The trumpet is the climax of that pattern, the soul's alarm clock, sounding at the edge of transformation. In Jungian terms, this is the activation of what he called the transcendent function, the psychic mechanism that unites opposites and generates new consciousness. It begins when the tension between your outer life and inner truth becomes unbearable. The trumpet symbolizes that tension reaching its breaking point. It announces the old mode of being can no longer sustain you. Something has to give. This sound often coincides in waking life with crisis. The sudden end of a relationship, the collapse of a career, an illness, a betrayal, or even a profound mystical experience. The psyche, unable to integrate its contradictions gradually, dramatizes the change through rupture. The outer event echoes the inner core. Jung warned that those who refuse inner transformation are compelled to carry the problem through life in concrete form. That is, the neglected symbol becomes a lived tragedy. But in the dream, you are still within the realm of meaning, not yet consequence. The trumpet offers a choice. Wake consciously or wait for the world to do it for you. The question is not what is this sound, but what truth is trying to get my attention. In alchemical terms, this moment is called solutio, the breaking apart of fixed forms. The sound dissolves boundaries, ego defenses, and illusions of permanence. Jung saw this dissolution as sacred, writing, "The greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. The trumpet does not solve, it calls you to grow." Many who experience this dream report both terror and exhilaration. The terror belongs to the ego that senses its control slipping away. The exhilaration belongs to the self, which finally feels heard. This duality is the hallmark of real awakening, dread and awe woven together into a single vibration. To respond to the trumpet is to begin listening to your life differently, to notice the repeating patterns, the voices you silence, the coincidences that seem to organize themselves around your refusal. Consciousness, once awakened, cannot be put back to sleep. Jung compared this to the sound of the divine wind in the Old Testament, both destructive and creative, sweeping away illusion so truth can stand. And yet, as every transformation begins to unfold, chaos follows. The trumpet opens the door, but what comes through is fire, the fierce element that burns away what can no longer stay. After the trumpet, the world burns. Cities collapse, skies darken, oceans rise, and fire devours everything familiar. This is the moment most people fear, the imagery that convinces them the dream must be prophecy. But Jung would tell us that the psyche does not destroy without purpose. It burns only what cannot continue. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." The dream of destruction, then, is the soul's last resort, a vision powerful enough to overcome our resistance. When the unconscious sets fire to the dream world, it is dramatizing the death of the old personality, the habits, beliefs, and identities that have kept your life too small for your own becoming. In psychological language, this is the stage of ego death. The structures that once gave stability now crumble under the weight of growth. You may feel in waking life that everything is collapsing, relationships ending, ambitions dissolving, faith unraveling. Yet in the symbolic order, this is not punishment, it is purification. Jung likened this process to alchemy's nigredo, the blackening, when the material of the soul is heated until its impurities rise and separate. It is the night sea journey, where light is born only through descent. Fire in dreams is the element of transformation. It does not merely destroy, it transfigures. Jung saw in fire the living image of the spirit itself, both consuming and illuminating. He wrote, "The spirit is a burning thing. It burns itself and others, and it consumes itself in the process." The psyche uses this archetype to signal that something sacred is taking place within the ruin. The destruction of the outer form makes room for the inner life to expand. Notice how, in many of these dreams, the dreamer does not die. They stand amidst the flames, watching everything collapse around them, yet somehow remain untouched. This is the self revealing its indestructibility. The world that burns is not the world itself, it is your psychic construction of it, your certainties, attachments, and masks. The soul sets them ablaze so that essence can survive. In alchemical symbolism, this corresponds to the burning away of base matter before gold can emerge. The ego's illusions are the dross. The consciousness that remains is the purified essence. Jung described this process as the individuation of fire, the moment when the personality yields its fragments to the self, becoming transparent enough for spirit to shine through. You might recognize this archetype in life as the burnout, the dark night of the soul, or the collapse of meaning. Modern culture treats these states as pathology, but Jung saw them as invitations to deeper authenticity. He wrote, "Only the wounded physician heals," meaning only one who has watched their own world fall apart can truly understand wholeness. In the dream, as towers crumble and landscapes dissolve, something new begins to stir in the ashes. This destruction is not the end, it is the clearing. The psyche removes every false structure so that what is eternal in you can emerge. And when the last ember fades, there comes a strange peace. In that silence, many dreamers report seeing light returning not from above but from within. And so the final symbol appears. The reunion, the ascent, the radiant calm after devastation. Where once there was only fire, there is now illumination. When the fire has done its work, silence follows. And out of that silence, light, not the blinding light of destruction, but the gentle radiance of understanding. The dreamer finds themselves rising, floating, or embraced by figures of light. Loved ones appear, not as they once were, but transfigured symbols of reconciliation. The feeling that once was terror now becomes peace. In Jungian language, this is the stage of integration with the self, the return to inner unity after fragmentation. Jung described the self as the totality of the whole psyche, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the God image within the soul, the organizing center that draws the ego toward wholeness. In rapture dreams, this is the moment when the ego finally yields, allowing the self to shine through unopposed. The ascent, therefore, is not escape, it is union. The dreamer is not leaving earth, but reconciling heaven and earth within. Jung wrote, "The goal of psychological development is the realization of the self, not the worship of the ego." The rising motion symbolizes that realization. The energy once trapped in fear now moves freely toward its source. The psyche, having survived its purifying fire, becomes transparent to spirit. Reunion scenes in these dreams, meeting lost relatives, being welcomed by beings of light, hearing music that seems eternal, represent the reintegration of the psyche's split aspect. The lost loved ones are often symbolic fragments of the self, long exiled through guilt or grief. When they appear smiling, luminous, or forgiving, it means the inner conflict has resolved. The dreamer has accepted what was once rejected. Jung once wrote, "The meeting with the self is at first the meeting with one's own shadow, and the later recognition that this dark opponent was the bringer of light." The earlier signs, fear, loss, collapse, were not mistakes, they were preparations. The psyche does not leap to enlightenment, it burns its way through illusion. Only after we have faced our shadow does the true light arrive, not from outside salvation, but from the integration of opposites within. In this stage, time feels different. The dream may slow into a stillness beyond motion. The air itself glows. Jung called this the numinous presence, the direct felt sense of wholeness that transcends thought. It is not ecstasy in the emotional sense, but a deep calm and knowing that everything belongs. The dreamer often wakes weeping softly, not from fear, but from recognition. The psyche has touched its center and knows it. This, Jung believed, is the essence of religious experience stripped of dogma. He said, the self is our life's goal, for it is the completest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality. To meet the self is to remember who you were before fear divided you. The ascent is simply the ego realizing it was never separate from the light it sought. And yet, this illumination is not an ending, it is an invitation. The dream does not grant escape from life. It sends you back renewed to live it more consciously. For the self does not awaken you to float away, it awakens you to embody what you have seen. The vision fades, the light dissolves, and the dreamer returns to waking life changed, carrying a quiet knowing that the apocalypse was never about leaving, it was about arriving. So, when your rapture dream ends in light, understand it as the psyche's benediction. The world that burned is gone, but the true world, the inner one, has been reborn. And now that we have followed the sequence of symbols to its completion, we must ask, what do we do with this knowledge when we wake? How can we live differently in the daylight? After such visions of the soul, after such visions, after skies have opened, the world has burned, and light has embraced you, waking life can feel strangely muted. You lie in bed, heart trembling, half between worlds. The temptation is to dismiss it as just a dream or to fixate on when it might happen again. But Jung would remind us that the dream has already happened, its meaning is alive now, asking to be lived. He wrote, a dream that is not understood remains a mere occurrence. Understood, it becomes a living experience. The work, then, is to turn the occurrence into experience, to bring the language of the unconscious into dialogue with your waking self. The first step is always recording. Write the dream immediately. Don't worry about literary beauty or perfect memory. Just begin. Last night, I dreamed the world was ending. Let the images spill unedited onto the page. But most importantly, note the emotion. Jung emphasized that the feeling tone of a dream is its nucleus of meaning. The details shift like clouds, but the emotion remains the message. Did you feel terror, awe, relief, homesickness? That is the psyche speaking in its truest tongue. Next, title, the dream. This may seem small, but naming gives shape. A title condenses the essence. The sky opened, left behind, fire everywhere, the light returned. The unconscious loves metaphor, and the title anchors that metaphor in consciousness. It is the first act of integration. Then ask 3 questions, not to interpret like a code breaker, but to begin a dialogue. What in me is ending? What new life is calling? What fear is disguising itself as prophecy? These questions transform the dream from prediction to participation. They take the energy of what will happen and return it to what is happening in me. Jung often said that the psyche is self-regulating. If we cooperate with its movements, it heals itself. The dream is your invitation to cooperate. After reflection, move into symbol engagement. Choose one image that stands out, the trumpet, the fire, the ascent, and interact with it consciously. Draw it, speak to it, write from its point of view. Ask, why have you come? Jung developed a method called active imagination, in which the dream image is treated as a living figure of the psyche. When you give it form in art or movement, you allow unconscious energy to flow into consciousness without distortion. The goal is not aesthetic perfection, but conversation. Finally, ground the insight through what I call soul action. Take one small embodied step that honors what the dream revealed. If the dream was about fire, clear space in your life, let something go. If it was about light, spend time in stillness, in gratitude. If it was about being left behind, reach out to someone in genuine vulnerability. Jung wrote, "You can only find the divine within what you do, not in what you think." The psyche changes through lived participation, not interpretation alone. It's important here to resist the ego's urge to claim mastery. The dream is not solved, it is tended. Like a sacred flame, it requires care and humility. The unconscious will respond when you listen, not through new dramatic visions necessarily, but through subtler signs. Peace where there was anxiety, clarity where there was confusion, life quietly reorganizing itself around truth. In this way, the rapture dream ceases to be an isolated mystery. It becomes a guide one that continues to unfold long after you wake. Each dream worked with consciously becomes part of a living conversation between you and the self. And as more individuals begin that dialogue, something shifts in the collective as well. For what we integrate personally reduces the shadow of the world. This is where the work turns outward. Because the dream, no matter how private it feels, always carries a message for more than one person. When many dream the same symbols, the soul of culture itself is dreaming through us. When one soul integrates its apocalypse, the dream does not end, it ripples. Because the unconscious is not a private chamber, it is a living ocean shared by all who dream. Jung called this deeper stratum the collective unconscious, and he believed that the symbols which arise within it are not personal inventions, but eternal patterns, the archetypes of humanity itself. When thousands of people begin to dream of endings, it means the archetype of renewal through destruction has been activated in the collective psyche. This happens in times of profound imbalance, when the conscious culture drifts too far from nature, soul, and meaning. The collective unconscious compensates, sending through its messengers the dreamer's visions powerful enough to break through the surface of denial. Jung wrote, "The world hangs by a thin thread, and that thread is the human psyche." The turmoil we witness outside reflects a psychic event taking place within humanity itself. Rapture dreams are one form of this psychic weather. They show that our civilization, so addicted to control and progress, secretly longs for transcendence. The sky opening symbolizes a cultural yearning for the sacred. The vanishing people mirror our collective fear of isolation in the age of hyperconnection. The fire reflects our confrontation with the ecological and spiritual consequences of our disconnection. The self of humanity, its unifying center, seeks to reawaken. Jung observed that the salvation of the world consists in the salvation of the individual soul. That means collective renewal begins when even one person becomes more conscious. Every dream you integrate, every fear you face, every illusion you allow to die lightens the weight of the collective shadow. What you heal privately becomes part of the healing of the world. This is why dreams often feel like they belong to everyone. They do. The psyche uses individual dreamers as entry points for global messages. Our nightmares, then, are not curses but communications. When society loses its connection to the numinous, the unconscious compensates through dreams that feel divine or apocalyptic, as if saying, "Remember, the sacred still speaks." Jung warned that the greatest danger to civilization is not an external enemy, but the psychic infection of mass unconsciousness. In that sense, every person who listens to their dreams contributes to psychic immunity. Consciousness itself becomes an act of service. You can see this pattern everywhere. Art, film, collective visions all echo the same motifs. The culture dreams for us what we cannot yet accept. We fear the apocalypse, yet we binge watch it on screens. We sense endings approaching, yet deep down we long for a new world. Jung would say, the archetype of transformation is stirring, demanding incarnation through our awareness. The question is not whether the world is ending, but what part of the old world in us must end for a truer one to emerge. So when you dream of rapture, remember that it is not just your personal journey, it is a thread in the vast tapestry of humanity's renewal. The same self that awakens in you is awakening in countless others, each through their own images of destruction and light. Jung wrote, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you." Rapture dreams ask us to answer that question consciously, to know ourselves before the collective unconscious forces change through catastrophe. Each time you interpret your dream as an inner transformation instead of outer doom, you reduce collective fear and increase collective awareness. You calm, ever so slightly, the psychic storm. And now, with the 5 signs complete, and their meaning both individual and collective revealed, we can gather them together, seeing how they form one great pattern of death and renewal, descent and ascent, ending and integration. When we step back from the 5 signs, a pattern emerges, a hidden architecture of the soul's transformation. What at first looked like fragments of chaos now reveals itself as a coherent map, the inner rapture map. Jung would say that an archetype has completed its cycle of manifestation, leading consciousness through its descent into dissolution and its return to unity. It begins with the sky opening, the revelation of something greater than the ego. This is the initial breakthrough of the Numinous, the light of the self entering awareness. It is the annunciation of transformation, the signal that the unconscious has chosen this moment to reveal its presence. The ego feels awe, sometimes terror, for it has glimpsed a dimension beyond its control. Jung wrote, "We need the healing experience of the numinous to find the meaning of life." The open sky is that first healing shock. Then comes people vanishing the loneliness of individuation. Once the soul has glimpsed its higher direction, it must detach from the collective illusions that held it, relationships, identities, and beliefs that once defined us now recede. The psyche dramatizes this as abandonment, yet it is really differentiation, the moment when the seed separates from the soil to grow toward its own sun. Next, the trumpet sounds, the voice of destiny, the unmistakable call to awaken. The unconscious, having withdrawn its projections, demands participation. The ego is no longer allowed to sleepwalk. Jung saw this as the activation of the transcendent function, where inner opposites press toward reconciliation. The psyche begins to move under its own authority. Then, the inevitable fire and collapse, the death of the old personality. What cannot adapt must burn. The self consumes outdated forms of identity, the way nature clears a forest for new growth. Jung compared this to alchemical nigredo, the dark night in which consciousness is purified through suffering. Everything false is reduced to ash. And finally, the light, reunion, and ascent. The return to wholeness. Having died to illusion, the psyche experiences resurrection. The self and ego no longer battle. They reflect each other. This is what Jung called the conjunctio, the mystical marriage of opposites, the reconciliation of spirit and matter, heaven and earth, conscious and unconscious. Seen together, these stages form a spiral, not a line. The process repeats across a lifetime. Revelation, separation, confrontation, destruction, integration. Each revolution brings consciousness closer to the self. Jung said, life is a process of becoming. The whole point is to become more and more what you are. The rapture dream is that process revealed in symbolic form. When you view the dream as a whole, you see that it was never about escaping the world, it was about redeeming it. The apocalypse is not cosmic punishment, but psychological renovation. The world that ends in the dream is the one built by fear. The world that begins afterward is the one built by consciousness. The dreamer is not taken away, but taken in, drawn into a deeper participation with life itself. Or, as we might say, the sky opens, the soul remembers. The people vanish, the ego releases. The trumpet sounds, awareness awakens. The fire comes, illusion burns. The light returns, wholeness lifts, and beneath them all runs one truth. The rapture dream isn't about escaping Earth. It's Earth escaping your illusion. Now that we have traced this archetypal journey, we must learn how to hold it in daily life, to ground the energy it awakens so it doesn't consume us or inflate us. Every initiation requires integration. Every vision its embodiment. Every genuine revelation requires an act of return. Without grounding, even light becomes dangerous. It blinds instead of illuminating. Jung often warned that encounters with the numinous can either heal or inflate, depending on whether they are integrated. He wrote, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The vision of ascent must therefore end with descent into the body, into the present, into the living world that sustains you." This is why we end with a simple ritual of integration, not a ceremony of escape, but of embodiment. Take a quiet moment, somewhere you can sit without distraction. Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing once again in the landscape of your dream, the one that had burned, collapsed, or dissolved. But now there is no fear. The smoke has cleared. You can see the horizon. Feel your feet on that symbolic ground. Notice that it is solid beneath you. Breathe deeply, and with each breath, let the ashes of the old world settle. They are not waste, they are soil. Out of what was destroyed, something new can grow. Now imagine a soft light descending not from above as command, but as warmth, as understanding. Let it move through the crown of your head and into your body, filling the space that loss once occupied. This is not fantasy, it is participation. You are inviting the self to inhabit the form it has prepared through all these transformations. As the light settles, listen for what Jung called the still, small voice of the inner guide. It rarely speaks in words. It may come as a sensation, a memory, or a quiet sentence forming itself within you. Whatever arises, receive it without judgment. It is the psyche's way of saying, "I am here." Then open your eyes, either in the visualization or in waking life, and look around. See the ordinary world, the room, the chair, the breath in your chest. This is where revelation belongs. Jung believed that the purpose of every mystical experience was not to escape reality, but to sanctify it. The divine must return to the human if it is to be whole. When you feel ready, write a few lines in your journal, not an analysis, but a record of presence. You might write, "Nothing real can be lost. Only illusions burn." This affirmation anchors the experience. It reminds you that every ending was a clearing and every clearing is an act of grace. Finally, contemplate this question. What new world begins when I stop waiting to be taken? Let the answer come slowly, over days or weeks. Integration is not instant, it is seasonal. The light revealed in the dream now becomes the work of living through kindness, courage, honesty, and creativity. And so the cycle completes itself. The soul that rose returns, carrying its fire as warmth instead of destruction. This is the real awakening, not the one that leaves the body, but the one that brings the soul home to it. The dream of the end was never about ending, it was about remembering. When we began this journey, the images of the rapture, the trumpets, the vanishing, the fire, the ascent seemed like divine interruption, a cosmic event breaking into human time. But now we can see It was your own soul breaking through your walls of certainty. The apocalypse in your sleep is not a warning from above. It is the whisper of the self rising from below. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Rapture dreams are the moment fate knocks on the door of awareness and asks to be invited in. You've seen how each sign follows the arc of transformation, revelation, separation, awakening, destruction, renewal. This is not just myth, it's the structure of psychological rebirth. The psyche moves through its own sacred sequence until the personality becomes transparent enough for the self to live through it. Jung called this process individuation, and he believed it to be the highest purpose of human life. Not perfection, not escape, but wholeness. To dream of the end is to be called into that purpose, to awaken not out of the world, but into it. The rapture is not about leaving the earth behind, it's about allowing consciousness to enter it more fully. Each time you integrate one of these dreams, you become a point of light through which the collective unconscious heals itself. You become, as Jung said, a channel through which the world's soul can flow. So, when the world feels heavy, remember, every true apocalypse is followed by dawn. The dream does not predict tomorrow. It invites you to live today with greater depth, compassion, and awareness. The transformation that takes place in one person extends invisibly to many others, as if each conscious heart illuminates a small corner of the world's darkness. If this journey has spoken to you, let it continue beyond this moment. Reflect on your own dreams. Share them. Write them down. Discuss them not in fear, but in wonder. As Jung reminded us, the dream is the little hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. Each time you open that door, you participate in the world's renewal. And when you share what you find in art, in conversation, in the quiet courage of honest living, you join the great work of healing that humanity has always been called to. The end of the world, in the language of the soul, is simply the end of unconsciousness. Thank you for walking through this with me, through the dark, the flame, the silence, and the light. If the dream has moved you, I invite you to share your own experience in the comments. What did your rapture dream show you? What changed in you after it? Each story becomes part of the greater dialogue between the individual and the eternal. And as always, remember, don't wait to be lifted. Wake up to what's rising in you.